Good morning, everyone. My name is Elena Firsava. This is Svetlana Kamyshanskaya. We are attorney and founder of Primum Law Group. We developed a webinar for you that's called How to Move the Company to US, which will address the most hot topics startup founders have when they try to enter the US market. We encourage everyone to ask their questions while the presentation lasts, and we will address them after the presentation. During the presentation, we will address any issues we believe you may face when you enter the US market. We will present a few examples from our practice. And this is Svetlana Kamyshanskaya, the first speaker of the presentation. She has more than 20 years of experience working with startups. And me, Elena Firsava, corporate attorney at Primum Law Group. So good morning, everyone. We're happy to see you here, and we're ready to begin.
Good morning, everyone. As a founder of Primum Law Group, I want to say a few words about the practice that we have and why we're here. So basically, Primum Law Group is a boutique law firm, and we specialize in providing services to tech companies and startups. A lot of our work is related to startups. We help them to set up the company, to raise capital. We advise them on a strategy, like negotiation process with investors. We represent them in an exit, meaning that if company is getting acquired, we do represent our clients during the M&A transactions. A lot of our clients are foreign founders who either started the company in different jurisdiction and expanded that company to the US, or came here and started the company here. So I think we have a lot of experience, a lot of cases to share, and let's start with the agenda.
Yes, so I would like to encourage everyone again to ask their questions to the chat while the presentation lasts. And before we begin, we would like to present you a few polls, the answers to which will help us to understand the audience, the background of the founders that are currently on the call. So we would like to ask Gloria to present polls for the audience. So please see the polls and answer where you're currently located. And the second poll will ask you to provide information about at what stage of financing you currently are. We're still receiving the responses. Okay, from what I can tell right now is that most of you do have financing outside of the US or do not know at which stage of financing they are, which is good for this webinar because we will address this question later. And in terms of the location, most of you are from Europe. Then we have founders from Asia, and we don't have anyone from the US, and there are other territories that also indicated here. So if you could type in the chat from where are you, that will be helpful also for us to understand and better fit the presentation for you today. Okay.
Elena, correct. We have 40% from the US. I don't know. You said
this is my response.
Okay. Okay.
We're ready to begin. We will begin from the motivational statement of Twitter co-founder B. Stone. A time in perseverance and 10 years of trying will eventually make you look like an overnight success. We wish everyone to develop the great plan that will look like this. We understand the hard effort that you put into building your company, and we believe that this webinar will help you to understand how to structure the business goals that will help your startup to grow and to grow to the US market. Uh, so the first question we would like to address is why companies are willing to enter the US market. Why startup founders are trying to enter US, and like what are the goals and how to structure the goals when people are trying to enter the US market. There are several reasons why startup founders are trying to move their companies to the US, and we will present major of them. One of them is raising capital, the other one is market expansion, and the last one is finding an exit, meaning finding and acquire a person who will acquire and buy your company. Let me give a few examples on that. When startup founders are looking for raising capital in the US, they already have a minimum valuable product and a solid idea before they come into the US. The reason for that is that founders already rose capital overseas, and the capital that they rose is not sufficient to address all business goals that they have and not sufficient to find the solution they're looking for. Raising capital in the US is also related to an opportunity to meet consultants, advisors, VC, angel investors, like be in the crowd, network, and understand how business works from different perspectives. When founders come to us with the question of market expansion, we usually facilitate the process of doing so. We help to prepare necessary legal document, commercial documents that understand certain features of US market and help the founders to grow their business and grow their product or services to the US. We analyze the product with which they came to us, and we develop the plan of expansion applicable to the US environment. Finding an exit, as I mentioned before, means that startup founders are looking for an acquirer, a company or person who is willing to buy a company or willing to buy substantially all assets or shares of the company. In our practice, we see founders that believe that the companies are mostly acquired during the later stages of financing, but according to statistics of 2021, 50% of the companies and even more are sold during the seed stage or stage A of financing. When we have a client coming with an idea of exit, we're helping with the strategy on how to do that in the US. We help to draft the merger documents, asset sale documents, and explain how the process of exit is going to look to them in the US from the US perspective. As a startup founder, we understand you have a lot of ambition and you would like to do all of the above. In this case, we expect to see the client who runs a successfully operating company in the country of their formation with the great team, with the great product, and with the ideas that they're willing to incorporate in the US. It is very possible to cover every goal that we just addressed. You just need to have a right team, defined plan, and great legal support. Svetlana, do you want to add anything to this topic?
No, I don't
Yeah.
later.
Defining the right plan is the key solution for the process of developing startup to the US. Recently, we had an Israeli company coming to us and asking to form an LLC in Delaware. They already generated some profit back in their home country, and they came to us and they said, yeah, we want an LLC and we want an LLC in Delaware. When we asked questions like, can you please clarify why you're willing to open LLC, why in Delaware? They said, oh, actually, we Googled that. And this is what most of the startup founders usually do when they enter the US market. So that's why we decided to proceed with that plan. So what we're willing to share today is that defining the right plan doesn't mean that every plan will suit every country, every startup founder, every product that you develop. So it's really important to understand and consult with legal professional on how to do that and how to access the US market. Let's start and discuss forms of different legal presence in the US. The most popular among them is corporation and LLC. But the question that we need to discuss before we will address corporation and LLC types of corporate planning in the US, we need to address the most crucial question. Does the business have to form a corporate entity in the US in order to start selling goods or product in the US? There is a concept that exists between startup founders that you can start selling in the US without forming an entity here. The answer to this question is complicated, but to summarize, it matters to form company in the US here from tax and liabilities protection services. And Svetlana will address later how tax and liabilities are crucial and important question for you before you move the company to the US. Sorry. The most popular types of corporate presence in the US, corporation and LLC. Before answering founder's question, what do they need, corporation or LLC, we need to obviously determine their business goals. Uh, Secondly, after we determined what type of corporate structure they probably need, we need to discuss the product they have. Because even if you decided to form an LLC or corporation, it might not be suitable for your particular company, for your particular startup, because of the product that you produce. Maybe it's a goods, maybe it's a services, so we need to know it in advance. The product could be different. It could be tangible and intangible. It can be related to the US government. It can be related to the area that is regulated by the US government. So we need to make sure that we address all of these questions before. But most important, usually we need to make sure that we protect startup founders' intellectual property asset, which is the most valuable asset startup founders have when they form the company. After choosing the right structure for your company, the second question we usually address with our clients is to how to bring money to your company. And raising capital is the most crucial topic that we will discuss today. We will address different types of raising capital you can see here in the Bay Area, especially, or in the US, which is different from what you saw in your home countries. And we developed a certain list that we believe represents the stages of financing startups usually face when they start to grow in the US. The first one is friends, families, and fools. We believe that every participant that that attends current webinar already rose capital among their families, friends. They also probably invested their own money to the company. So we will not go in depth to discussing this part. We will go and we will discuss other investment opportunities that you may have here when you enter the US market. The first one, which is now very popular among startup founders, is the crowdfunding. Crowdfunding, basically how it's structured, you have certain number of people, investors who are willing to invest into your company and you're willing to accept this money. However, the US government developed certain requirements that startup founders need to respect before they will attract this money. First of all, the amount of the crowdfunding that you can accept your company is limited with $5 million within 12 months period. So it is important to calculate and understand what is the amount of the funds that you're taking from people who are willing to invest as a crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is equity-based reward or product-based rewards. There are two types of crowdfunding that startup founder may willing to analyze and address and see which one better fit for their company. So equity-based reward crowdfunding means that people are willing to give money to your company and you're giving equity in your company in exchange. Product-based reward is that when people are willing to invest money into your company and you're willing to give them back in exchange the first access to the product that you developed or the first access to the services that you developed, and you don't need to actually give back any equity. The most popular usually is equity-based reward, but if you have startup that provides unique services or services that might be interested to the investors. Reward-based crowdfunding is what you're looking for. So you attract money to your company and you give back the first access to your product or the services that your company is going to produce. So as I mentioned, crowdfunding is very heavily regulated raising capital option. So we will discuss what else do we have on the market. Uh, Angel investors. Angel investors are also known as private investors or seed investors. These are usually high net worth people who are willing to invest individually into your startup, or they're willing to invest individually in specific entrepreneur because entrepreneur has unique qualities that this angel investor never seen on this market. Often, angel investors are found among entrepreneurs' families and friends. The funds that angel investors provide might be a one time investment that will help to grow the product of your company, or it can be a series of investments that angel investors provide to you. Usually, as obviously, when angel investors is willing to invest into your company, they're expecting to receive equity back in your company, or they're doing it by like convertible interest, and they're doing it by instruments, sorry, or they're doing it by safe investments. So it depends on how you're going to structure your deal. The one of the most popular raising capital opportunities in the U.S. Are venture capitalists. These are the private equity investors that are usually represented by the companies. And venture capitalists are investors who are looking to help your startup to grow in the US. And investment could be from venture capitalists from seed stage, from A stage. Usually, venture capitalists support you through different stages of financing, and they support small and big companies that need help in expansion to the US market. How can we distinguish among them? Angel investors usually invest on the early stages, and venture capitalists usually invest on the later stages in more developed companies. But at the same time, if you have a right legal consultant, or Primum Law Group, we can help you to understand how to structure deals with angel investors and venture capitalists and how to raise capital in the US. Uh, the last opportunity to raise capital is to use the business loan. Business loans are usually really hard to get, and therefore they become less favorable type of raising capital among startup founders who are coming from overseas to the US. If a client that comes with an idea of a business loan, we always check whether their assets in the company are higher than their liabilities. Because if it's the opposite, it's unlikely that the founder will be able to get the business loan. But we're also obviously happy to discuss this type of raising capital as business loan with everyone who are coming to the US and advise whether or not it's the best structure for them raising capital. Uh, the topic that we discussed before and prior we began this presentation is at what type of stage of financing you're currently in. Usually we distinguish five different stages of financing, and we will address a few of them right now. So as you've seen on the poll, we asked you whether you are on a pre-seed, seed stage, stage A of financing, or whether you acquired your capital overseas. So, what do we really understand under the pre-seed stage of financing? This is typically the first stage of financing, the most common stage where startup founders are looking for capital among close friends or angel investors, and we arrange the pre-seed stage with $1,500,000 to $1 million of investment that is coming from investors or friends to the company. The seed stage is a later stage of financing. Although there is no big like a borderline between a pre-seed or a seed stage of financing, we can analyze and determine that usually the seed stage of financing is when 5 to 10 million of dollars is invested into the company through venture capitalists, through angel investors, or business loans. There are also later stages of financing. I will present them here. It's Series E, Series B, Series C. But as we discussed before, most of the startup founders believe that the company can be acquired only in the later stages of financing, like B or C, when there are like already 10, 20 millions invested in the company, which is not the case in the US. And here, especially in the Bay Area, the company may be acquired at the seed stage of financing. So in order to determine how to structure finances, how to raise capital, and at what stage of financing you're currently in, we advise everyone to consult with business consultant or legal consultant who will help you to develop the plan and address the questions you may have in the stages of financing. I would like now to give the word to Svetlana. Svetlana will address the topics that startup founders do have when they come to us that are not related to raising capital, defining the corporate structure, but very crucial and very hot right now. So we encourage everyone again to ask their questions to the chat, and Svetlana will present the next question here.
Yeah, thank you, Elena. So before I move to other considerations that startups have to have in mind while they're transferring businesses from abroad, I wanted to just summarize what Elena said. Elena provided a lot of details in terms of what kind of companies exist, what kind of financing, what are the sources of financing. But I want you to think about your company and see the bigger picture. So basically, a lot of startups, a lot of founders, especially when they come from abroad, try really to navigate the system and navigate that uncharted territory using the sources as Google, groups of different startup communities, and learn what other companies do while they make decisions. Um, in fact, it could be very detrimental for the companies. And we see that a lot, starting from using illegal Zoom when the in fact founders required legal advice and kind of some guidance, or implementing structure because someone else has that. And startup founders believe that this is the applicable situation. So when we start working with founders, first we ask them what is the goal, right? So the founder has to have a clear vision and definition why he or she of them set up the entity in the US right now. Because sometimes there are a few goals and they cannot really identify what is more important. And we have to, like, when we have goals, we have to have a timeline in place, because whatever you do really depends on not just what your goal is, but when you're trying to achieve that goal. And that affects corporate structure. If it affects corporate structure, it affects taxation, and it affects your possibility to raise capital. And you cannot use, for instance, the same structures to sell product in the US and raise capital in the US. Most likely those are going to be contradictory, or we have to implement like the structure when we have a few entities, and we can differentiate which entity tries to achieve the specific goal. So that's just a little bit of add-on on the topic that Alina just presented. In terms of other considerations, of course, we're in the US. Everyone knows that US immigration system is quite rigid, closed. Immigration is a challenge, and it's a process. And while we discuss the topic of bringing business to the US, immigration is one of the considerations that we discuss. Why? Because sometimes the corporate structure can depend on that. So sometimes we really need to show the affiliation or like dependency on the foreign entity. We have to make sure that we have sufficient funding, for instance. So those are just a few examples why we need to know what are the immigration matters that can exist in this specific company even before we structure the company. In some cases, before we filed the company for the registration or we form the entity, we run the structure by immigration lawyers because we want to make sure that it's not just like the company, right? We want to make sure that the company is going to be used by you in order to achieve the goals that you have in mind. And if you cannot bring the key people, or like as a founder, you cannot come here and work here and raise capital here because the entity was not formed in the right way, that's not something that we want for you. So immigration is a serious consideration. Elena, move to the next one. Taxes. We mentioned briefly that tax is a consideration while we form the company. Like really, taxation depends on the corporate structure, and taxation depends on even type of an entity that you choose to form in the U.S. Uh, that's one part of the equation. But another part is that even if you don't generate if you generate profit abroad and you have different entity abroad, in some cases you have a requirement to disclose that information. So taxes are not just necessarily about paying taxes. Sometimes we refer to compliance that exists. Another example is that when companies come to the US and companies are interested in selling product in the US. And as Alina properly mentioned, that a lot of business owners think that they can expand to the US market and sell products on Amazon without really forming the company. Or like Amazon, in fact, requires you to provide some information, but other platforms without forming the company. It's not practical on one hand. On another hand, it's really risky because you have a contact with the U.S. authorities, and IRS want to tax the profit that you generate in the U.S. And when you don't have a separate entity, it's really hard to differentiate the profit that was obtained in the U.S. versus profit generated in other countries. So what the U.S. authority presumes that everything you have is generated in the U.S. So that's a basic presumption. And you can definitely fight and prove otherwise, but it's going to take a lot of time, efforts, and money on legal services. So again, it's just one of the examples that even to start selling your product in the U.S., even if the sales happens online, you have to have an entity, and we have to discuss what is the proper form of entity, how we can optimize taxes here, and it all depends on different like factors, and they are individual in every single case. I want to touch transfer pricing. Lynn, go back. Transfer pricing. That's another topic that not everyone really aware, and people think that they can optimize taxes by doing so. So basically, transfer pricing exists when two related entities conduct business. So let's say you have the US entity, you have a foreign entity, and you try to transfer most of revenue from the US to another entity in order to use the low tax bracket in the foreign jurisdiction. So IRS knows that that's kind of the very common scenario. So in this case, IRS may ask you, how did you put the price on the services that foreign entity provides, right? So how did you determine the price? And if that pricing is not consistent with the market, that the difference could be taxed in the US. In order to avoid that, when we form the structure and when we understand kind of the relationship among entities within one structure, we suggest our clients to do transfer pricing studies when licensed professionals analyze the market, compare similar products, uh, come to the conclusion that this pricing, like for the services provided from the US I'm sorry, from the foreign entity, but paid by the US entity, are consistent with the market value, or like the price has to be corrected. So this is one of the way to avoid potential challenges, just by knowing what it should be done on the right time and right place. Yeah, intellectual property. Another important consideration. So we all understand that intellectual property is the main asset that startups have. And of course, intellectual property is something that really is a subject for due diligence at every single stage of the company development and raising capital. So even if these days, even if you go to experienced angel investors, that would probably ask you to provide some information about intellectual property. But your first round of venture capital funding is uh, definitely requires a lot of disclosures on the side of intellectual property. And you don't just provide information on what you have to be able to provide information how you acquired that. And that usually triggers a lot of digging and going back, because when startup founder starts working on a product, in relatively often they forget to have proper agreements with developers, proper agreements with contractors and employees who are involved in the process. When it comes to international companies, we have to assess not just the availability of such contract, but enforceability of the contract according to the law of the jurisdiction where contract was formed. So basically, the whole point is to trace back and see that their IP was developed by the person who was in a contractual relationship with the company. That person assigned the rights to this intellectual property to the company, and the contract is enforceable, and consideration is paid. So if some of those contracts are missing, we before we raise capital, we try to go back and discuss and see if we can sign the contracts and make them effective with the date when they started working, and pay the consideration. The worst case scenario, these type of issues come up during the acquisition, so in the course of the transaction and deep due diligence, and that usually causes the reduction of the price for the company when it's been acquired, or additional payment to past employees and contractors for signing the documents that confirm the transfer of IP. Labor and employment. This is one of the hottest topics these days. So it used to be it wasn't very simple, especially in California. California employment law is very complicated and hard to navigate. It has different levels of regulations from counties to cities and states, so it's quite complex. But on top of that, these days we all know that a lot of people work from abroad, or work in different states when company exists in one state. So that has to be addressed. That has to be discussed. If you have a lawyer, you have to discuss it with lawyer. In worst case scenario, you have to have an experienced HR person who understands, or at least can spot the issue and address the specific issue with the lawyer. So the rule of thumb, I would say the most common practice these days is that if your employer works in a different jurisdiction but works for American company, that lawyer, or I'm sorry, the employer, that employee or contractor should not have work permit in the country where he or she physically locates. So let's say you have a California, Delaware corporation, your office is in California, but your contractors are where they are these days, like in Poland. Do you need to think about the employment matters in Poland and address them? If you have contractors, if they're okay not to get social benefits, they can have direct contractual relationships with the company. And with the example of Poland, you don't need to worry about work permits and employment law in Poland. But I'll give you another example. So in Netherlands, if you're physically located in the country, and even if you work for the foreign entity, you still have to have a work permit. And that's something that you have to be aware of. So that's again just one of the example why employment law is a significant consideration when we structure a relationship or hire people or involve people in IP development. We want to make sure that the product is not a subject for potential litigation. So we don't want to expose company, especially startup, to litigation at early stage, because usually it means that the company just wouldn't survive. No one wants to invest in potential problems. But when you start hiring, you have to be aware that there are many things that you have to think through and discuss with your advisors. Oh, product liability is our favorite. So the US is known as a country where people sue each other, and product liability is one of the most common litigation type. So it really depends on what type of product you develop, right? So when you consider what kind of exposure do you have, and as Alina properly mentioned, that when we even start discussing the company formation process, we assess what is the level of exposure. And in some cases, the level of exposure is very low. And for instance, we can use LLC if there are no other considerations in place. But if the level of exposure is quite high, we have to be careful and we have to keep it in mind. So what are the exposures? Like, of course, we talk about product liability when we talk about hardware. I don't know how many of you here in the hardware development business. If there are, please write in the chat, so we'll discuss that a little bit. A software these days operates using data, and that's something that we have to consider as one of the types of, I don't know, product liability, or at least liabilities. So if you use data, we have to assess how do you collect data, where do you store the data, if you're in compliance with privacy. Privacy, as you know, privacy law is very different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Europe has probably, for now, is one of the most complicated to comply with and difficult and high. Basically, Europe set up the high bar for compliance with the privacy law. California has very similar regulations, but different jurisdictions keep developing new rules and regulations. And we have to be aware of that, even if you develop not the hardware, which is kind of physical liability, but when we develop the software or like AI related products, which are very common these days. Yeah, so, and to close the presentation and open up the Q&A session, I want to emphasize the importance of seeing the process of the business growth as a puzzle. So you cannot like put it together until you have all pieces in place. And those pieces, we try to kind of point out what are the pieces, the key pieces that you have to have in mind while you develop the company. So forming the company with LegalZoom is a possible way for you when it's just, you know, kind of a placeholder. That's, and sometimes we say, okay, you're not ready yet to move forward. You're in the process of figuring out your idea, like you don't have a product yet. Maybe you don't even need the company, but if you want, you can go to LegalZoom. But when you have a minimal viable product, when you start thinking about raising capital, when you understand that the company is going to grow in the nearest future, you have to consider all those considerations that we mentioned during the presentation. So What are the goals? What is the timeline? When exactly you're planning to raise capital? What is going to be your exit strategy? Where are your founders located? So that affects taxation and maybe potential IP structuring. Uh, and yeah, who are going to move to the US if you're a foreign founder? Uh, do you have immigration law? Did you discuss your business plan with immigration lawyer? What are the import-export implications? Like, do you have uh, exposure to potential liability due to the nature of the product? So all those pieces have to be discussed first, or at least you have to keep them in mind while you're planning your expansion to the US. So yeah, and this is a slide, and I think we'll keep it for a little bit so you can read that. But basically, as I mentioned at the beginning of presentation, our job is to help you to grow your business. We're quite experienced lawyers, and we have a good network of professionals in the Silicon Valley. So when we start working with companies, we talk through all like key considerations. We see who you need, and we introduce you to professionals who can help you along the way. And I see my mission and the basically reason why I'm doing what I do is the idea to help startups to grow and be kind of a part of something nice and cool. I don't know anything about technology, really. Sometimes have a hard time to understand what it is. Like, I like working with engineers, but I'm definitely very challenged in technical space. But it's nice to be a part of something new and innovative, and that's why we love startups. So this is a slide that shows what the process is, how we work, how we onboard the clients, and what it takes. So we break up the process into 5 stages, and the first stage is the initial discussion and consultation. So basically, when we sit down, discuss where you are, and understand your unique situation, because as I mentioned, like every case is very different from each other. So usually during this stage or after we come up with a recommendation, we would say, okay, so based on what I've heard, you probably would need this, this, and this. And it's not like very extensive consultation, but we kind of give you the framework in terms of what we see is necessary in this specific case. And we explain you how we can help you with that process. So let's say we can take on this type of work, but the rest we refer you to professionals who can be instrumental. If that sounds good to you, we discuss the timeline, we discuss our engagement, and if it's like works for you, we start the onboarding process. So you sign the engagement letter, pay the retainer. After that, we have another call where we go deeper into details. We develop the step-by-step plan for you, so what should be done, and we start to implement that. That's our process. And we usually offer 5 free consultations for the first who submitted the request after that webinar.
Yeah, so thank you, Svetlana, for the presentation. We will present right now our emails, and the first 5 people to reach out to those emails will be able to receive 15 minutes free consultation. We will address any questions that you may have. I would like to present right now to the audience the questions that we received during the presentation. And Svetlana, if the question is within our scope, will be happy and able to address them. So the first question from Lucas, what are common conditions for investors providing findings? Percent from future profit, the share of the company, or other?
Um, That's an interesting question. So, what are the common conditions that investors assess? I don't see the question. So, can you repeat that, please?
What are common conditions for investors providing financing? Like what investors usually ask before they provide financing, probably.
Yeah. So, before investors, as I mentioned, like due diligence usually is a process that that is done before someone makes a decision about the investments. So if we talk about angel investors, they usually don't have means and qualifications to do deep due diligence. So they have to understand what kind of technology develop and you have to convey. So it's very emotional investment, basically. So angel investors invest based on feelings and the trust to the company. So they look who are their founders. Are they potentially capable of executing what they say they're planning to do? And if they like the product. That's as simple as that.
Yeah, team and products are
Yeah.
the most important.
And when it comes to venture capitalists, so then you have to be able to show
Mhm.
your um, structure. You have to be able to prove that basically you're not exposing investors to potential liabilities and litigations, meaning that you have what we mentioned, employment, IP is assigned,
Mhm.
all that. And of course, at every single, it doesn't matter if it's angel investment round A or round B, you have to be able to show how you're planning to spend money that you're going to raise, and preferably track record of hitting milestones. Let's say you
Mhm.
had an angel investment, you promise to angels that you do this, and this ABC for like X amount of money, and you've done that. So then when you go to venture capitalists, you say, here's my plan. We had that plan before. We hit all milestones. Now we have the second stage of the development. Here's how we are planning to spend money, and here's the list of milestones that we are trying to achieve within that specific time period. That's basically what investors assess.
Yeah, that's all called a pitch. So you have to be ready to prepare like a presentation pitch where you'll put all of this information and you need to be able to present it to investors also in a great way. Okay, second question. Can you please address opening the bank account for the US entity registered in the US from foreign country with all directors from foreign country? Our favorite question, Svetlana.
Yeah. So I don't think that it's possible these days. We used to have that platform called Mercury, which was not a bank. I think they still exist, but they stopped opening bank accounts remotely. You can try them. But in general, the rule of thumb is that someone has to be physically present in the US in order to open bank accounts. So even if you're a foreigner, which is fine, uh, you have to come here, provide the information about the entity, show that you are the CEO of the company, director of the company, so someone authorized by the company to open the bank account, and come with these documents to the bank branch and open the bank account. There are some jurisdictions that are more questionable in terms of like if you hold a passport, for instance, Russian passport these days, it's definitely going to be a red flag. I wouldn't say that it's impossible, but it's very challenging. So you just have to go from bank to bank and see, like try and hope that you're lucky enough to do so.
Yes. Second question, third question is a little bit more complex, so I don't know if we will be able to address it. I was told a good legal form to optimize taxes for funding as well as for an exit is the Cayman sandwich with a Cayman holding company, Delaware LLC intermediary, and LATAM operating company. Can be possible to do the same if you're based in the US.
Okay, this is very specific question.
Yes.
If you're based in the US, you can definitely do the same. Would it be necessary? And depends on like where the founders are. So when we structure the company and when we talk about tax optimization, we always keep in mind that we are planning that for exit. So whatever happens, founders get exit money, and that depends like what jurisdiction those founders are residents, tax residents, right? And that's how we plan. It's not about can we, of course we can, but do we need to, or would it benefit the founders? That's a question that has to be addressed in a very specific setting and scenario. So if you want, we can talk separately on that,
Yeah.
but it's too specific to address here.
And the next question, in which stage of the startup you would encourage the founders to get in touch with you?
That's a good question. So my rule is that whenever you get in touch, even if it's not the right stage for us to start working with you, you should leave us and being better off than before the conversation. So we'll definitely provide you some feedback in terms of are you ready to move forward or not. But if I would try to generalize, you have to start thinking about raising capital. So if you're not there yet, you probably either don't need the company or uh, like don't need a lawyer. So when we start working with founders or startups at usually the stage when they're ready to raise capital, try to raise capital. So they come even like forming the companies. We do form companies, and we have very good flat fee startup packages that I mean, from financial standpoint, they're very attractive. So the minimum package is 1,500, and we include a lot of helpful documents and access to law library to that. So we can do that. But in general, you even form the company for something, and that something is financing. So I hope I responded to the question.
Uh, the second question is, as a condition for O1 visa are tough, how can we deal with that?
How can you deal with the conditions to O1 visa?
Yes, probably.
To
Like if,
provide the proofs that you're qualified for O1. So that's the only way to deal with that. Compile the good package and provide the supportive documents that you are that talented person who would benefit the economy in the US.
yeah, we usually don't work with immigration questions, but we can always refer you to immigration attorneys with whom we work with, our partners. So please reach out to these emails, and probably more likely they will help you to create the case for O1 visa. Uh, we received the question: is renewables a good sector to look into? I guess this is not a really a legal question that we can address, Svetlana. I'm
We're
not
talking
sure.
about energy renewables.
Mm.
If that, I think it's very hot topic still, and definitely we have a few clients in that space.
Mhm.
I know that European jurisdictions, some European jurisdictions give grants on that industry. So if you're in Europe, you can consider taking some money there, kind of bring your product more or less to a minimal viable product and come to the US. But
Mhm.
this is before everyone started to do artificial intelligence, renewable was probably number one industry. Now it feels like
Yeah.
80% of startups doing AI technology. So
Yes. The last question that we received is, what will be an average cost in USD, including legal fees, to set up startup in the US? What is the minimum share capital requirement, and what will be the timeline?
there is no minimum capital requirement in the US. So when you form the company, like we set up the par value, what it called like minimum price per share, but it's really nominal. I don't know, $5 per capital or something in total. I mean, or $10. But in terms of the value, like fees, legal fees, I said we have. I cannot tell you how much it would cost for you specifically. We are almost welcome to start with the company formation package. And I mentioned that usually that package includes my consultation. So I'll talk to you and figure out what exactly you need in terms of the form of the entity. It's gonna include all company formation documents, including distribution of equity, stock certificates, and will provide you the access to legal library, where you would have, I don't know, agreements with consultants or job offer letters. So those documents that you need to have on a regular basis, like non-disclosure agreements. Sometimes it take me a lot of work to prepare the company for the formation because they already have existing structure abroad, and there are a lot of negotiations among stakeholders, and we need to discuss all of that before we move to the US. So that's a different setting. So usually what happens is that, again, like we start with a call, as I described in our process. So we do the first call, we discuss it, and if you are a good fit for that flat fee package, you take flat fee package, form the company, and we continue working with you after as you move and progress in your company development and business development. But sometimes you have already, or like clients have, um, kind of a baggage, or like multiple entities, a lot of stakeholders. Then, of course, it's a different fee and the timeline. The regular company formation process takes pretty much like 10 to 2 weeks. We say 10 days to 2 weeks. It's like average timeline. Okay.
Thanks everyone for the questions, for your attendance. So we will be on the lookout for emails to receive from you, and we will hope to see you on other webinars of IDEA to IPO. Thanks IDEA to IPO for providing the platform for this webinar. Stay tuned. Bye.
Bye.